Greetings, ICC members and chess fans, and welcome to the recap of rounds 11 and 12. What an unbelievable last two rounds in the open section, when everything was pointing towards the direction that Nepomniachtchi or Gukesh would be the winners of this year's candidates. We have Nakamura's 4 out of 5 winning streak coming back, bouncing back with unbelievable wins in the last rounds. And now we have a 3-way tie for the first place on +3, 7.5 points out of 12 rounds. And one of these 3 players for sure will be the winner of the candidates. But can we count Fabiano Caruana out? Yet I don't think we can. He's just behind on 7 points, only half a point away. And if he's able to win the last 2 games, he could still be in contention for first place. Now remember, if there's a tie between 2, 3 or even 4 players, then we go to tiebreaks. And in the rapid tiebreaks, I think that Nakamura will probably be the favorite. Gukesh is definitely not a good rapid player, so he needs to press down on the accelerator in the next 2 rounds. It's going to be really interesting. Nepo was really lucky yesterday in his game against Vidit. The game should have ended in a draw. He was very lucky to score the win. Gukesh played a very solid game against Avasov and he scored a very technical win. And Nakamura is just coming back game after game, winning games. We'll see one of his games against Fidoza today. For the next round, check on the key games of the round. We'll have Nepomniachtchi playing with white against Nakamura, while Gukesh will play with white against Fidoza. These 2 games will be key to determine who is going to be the winner. But even after that, we have last round showdown with Nakamura against Gukesh, a direct clash there, and Caruana playing against Nepo. This may be Caruana's last chance to get a shot at the first place. Meanwhile, in the women's candidates, it's much clearer. So Goryachkina and Lagno lost their games, one of them against Vaishali, as we will see today, and they are clearly out of contention. The winner of the women's candidates will be a Chinese player, either Tan Zhongyi, who's leading with 7.5, or Lei Ting Li, who's just behind with 7 points. Tan Zhongyi's be getting very lucky in the last rounds. We'll see what happens in the last 2 rounds between these 2 Chinese players, which of the 2 would prevail. Also careful with Vaishali. She's making a comeback, scoring wins against Muzichuk and Goryachkina, leaving both of them out of contention. Of course, she has no chance to get to the first place, but she can still do some upsets. Let's check on the games, see the 3 positions I've selected for today. This was a key game of the round. Round 11, Vidit playing with white against Nepomniachtchi. Now, the game was very closed, very technical, very drawish. Nepomniachtchi won a pawn, but it was very difficult to get that pawn for the win. But at the end, Vidit started playing slightly badly, low on time, and they arrived at this position. Last move of Nepomniachtchi, capturing a pawn on c3 with check. It's a very tricky position for Vidit with white now. His king is on the side of the board, even cut off by the rook. There could even be checkmate possibilities here. But look, the bishop is hitting the rook, so maybe there could have been a sacrifice. Here Vidit blundered and played king to a3. And now after rook to b4, black hit the knight, took the rook away from the attack on from the bishop, and closed the net around white's king. Knight to e5 followed by only move rook to g1, might have led to a draw, but it's a very tricky position. Vidit played knight to b2 check, and now he lost. King d2, rook f1, c4, opening up a threat with the bishop. Check, block with the knight, and now c3 is a winner. Of course, if bishop takes c3, king takes c3, bishop takes knight, and now rook to e4, discovered check, and the rook is hanging on e2. So white had to play rook f7, but now the game is over with a very precise c2, and there's no way to stop that pawn from getting to queen. A heartbreaking Vidit had to resign, and as you can see from the photo, which our editor will put here, he was totally devastated, while Nepomniachtchi was a very happy winner. In the original position, there was a very difficult move which Vidit had to play. He should have played rook takes knight check and bishop takes the rook. He probably rejected this option because he probably thought that this position he was going to lose. The pawn is blocked and black has a clear winning plan of pushing the c-pawn. However, a draw was in hand. Bishop to e5, and now, very important, h5. Giving up the pawn, but getting this pawn to promotion. The variation is forced now. Bishop f8, g7, take, and although two pawns far away from each other sometimes win against the bishop, not in this case. c4, c3, c2, and now there are a couple of ways to draw, but the best one is to block off the two pawns and prevent the king from coming to d2. h4, king b2, h3, bishop to f4, take, check, and the game is a draw. Of course, very difficult for Vidit to calculate this full variation when he was low on time, but that's one of the reasons why he lost this game. Another of the key games of yesterday's round was the game between Nakamura and Firouzja. A very tricky position. Nakamura sacrificed the pawn, but he was hoping to get enough counterplay, basically due to the threat on the black knight, and if the knight goes back, some discovered attacks on the bishop and the pawn on c7. But it's a very tricky position. Black has his own passed pawn running down the board. Now, according to the computer, the best move for Firouzja was knight takes f2. Actually, quite a difficult move to see. Rook takes f2, and now rook takes e2, with the idea that if white recaptures with the queen, then we get in knight to d3 with a triple attack. Now, for sure, Nakamura would have captured with the knight, but then bishop takes f2 check, knight to d3 check, knight to c1, and rook to c8. In this position, black does have a rook and two pawns for the two knights. Some chances to attack, and the white king is slightly out of position. I think this is a complex position and it could have gone any two ways. However, Firouzja went for another aggressive move. He went for d4, hitting the knight. But after knight to b5, d3, Nakamura could have played bishop d1 here, and it seems that the tactics worked for him. But instead of that, he played rook takes c5. He was actually quite critical about this in the post-game interview, and now played on this position. Rook takes f5, and now Firouzja played the natural knight takes e1, trying to pick up material. The computer suggests he had queen d7, which is a very difficult move for a human to make. not recovering any material and just putting pieces into play like this. This is totally computer line and really not very relevant because it's very difficult to see this on the board. Knight takes e1 is the normal move, exchange of queens, and rook a d8. But of course, now white starts to coordinate his pieces, and after rook to c5, followed by king to f2, Nakamura was able to coordinate his two pieces against the rook, and with no queens on the board and a relatively safe king, he was able to pick up the e2 pawn and go on to the win. Even so, I advise you to check the rest of the game. There was some ups and downs in it, but Nakamura prevailed. A very interesting tactical skirmish right out of the opening. And finally, one of the key games of round 11 in the women's section. Goryachkina, up to this point, was a contender for the first place. She was fighting undefeated, trying to catch up with the two Chinese players. She was only half a point behind. But she went down against Ramesh Babu Vaishali, the sister of Pragnananda. And the way she went down was quite impressive. In the position of the diagram, it's fairly equal. Both players have the same number of pieces and pawns, and both players are trying to attack. The computer suggests something like knight to c5, trying to put a bit of pressure and block off the rook. But Vaishali went for a combination. She played rook takes f8, king takes f6, and queen takes h6, with the idea of picking up two pawns and protecting the knight. However, this is risky and shouldn't have given her more than a draw. King to e7, take, queen to e4, good move. Now you exchange queens and the rook penetrates the position, or you have to give a perpetual check, which is what Vaishali started to do. And here, when everyone thought she would just take the draw, she pushed on with knight to c5 for the win. Very nice, very enterprising, but at the same time very risky. Queen to e1 check, queen to f2, and now she started checking again. But instead of taking the perpetual, she went for the second pawn. And now she's actually threatening queen to d8 and queen to d7, picking up the rook. Goryachkina decided to make it a day and take the draw, and she went for queen to d4, with the idea that after queen d8 and queen d7, Vaishali would win back the rook, but there's no way white can escape from a perpetual check here. However, Vaishali didn't do all of this just to take a draw now. She demonstrated high, aggressive, competitive spirit and went for the win. Queen to g8, queen to g5, queen to d8, queen to f6, queen to g6, queen to h7, queen to g8, queen to g5. I wonder if around here there's not been a threefold repetition. But in any case, now there's no more threefold repetition. Now, we can't leave the knight on d6 because white will come in and score a checkmate. So the key variation is that here, a few checks. And of course, the thing is, if we exchange queens, we'll lose the pawn ending. Sorry. Queen takes, king takes, and now, for example, d4, e5, and we can't capture the pawn from behind because the d pawn will score and white will capture the d6 pawn. But it's well known that in pawn endings, two faraway pawns win against two center pawns. For example, b4, a4, and g4. Now these two pawns can't advance, and white will first throw this pawn down the board. And when black comes to pick it up, the other pawn is thrown down the board. And one of these two pawns will promote. There's no way that black can control the two pawns. A very instructive variation. So in view of that, Goryachkina played d4, keeping the queens on the board. But now, queen to e5, check. And one of the key variations you can see here. If king to d7, check, and we can't capture the pawn because of the skewer from behind. Also, if queen to b7, a queen to f7 to protect the pawn, then we just play queen c5, we capture the pawn on d3, and this is a winning ending with two extra pawns. So Goryachkina, she's already in trouble here. She found king to f7 and check. But now, after the exchange of queens, the game is lost. For example, queen takes pawn, check, check, and we pick up the d pawn, and we win with our two distant pawns. Or queen takes queen, king to e7, and again we win with our two distant pawns. Goryachkina tried a last trick with d2. She could have resigned as well, but she allowed Vaishali to promote a lovely knight, which you hardly ever see in competition. And after knight takes b7, she had to resign. She's an extra piece up, and although black can promote, doesn't make much sense to just move the king away, and the game is completely lost. Now, with this win, Vaishali took every chance for Goryachkina to come back in the tournament. Now, as you can see on the score tables, the position is very tense. There's still 2 rounds left. Today is a rest day. You get the recap video, and we'll get an extra video in after the last round on Monday. So Saturday and Sunday, 2 huge days to determine who will be the winner of the candidates and who will face Ding Linen at the end of the year for the title, for the world title. Will it be Nepo? Will it be Nakamura? Or will it be Gukesh? Or will Fabiano Caruana still get a last chance in, win the last 2 games and prevail over the rest? My opinion, this will go to tie breaks. There's too many players altogether, very tightly. There's direct encounters. For me, it's very easy to see that there will be at least 2 players tied for the last round and we'll get tie breaks in. But we'll see that in the next video. Thanks for watching, guys, and have a nice last 2 rounds in the candidates.